Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to explain how I would go about drawing wavy or curly fur on hot press watercolour paper. There are a couple of waves in the coat that I just wanted to explain how I would go about drawing them. These are obviously waves rather than curls, but the principle is the same. So if I was doing tighter curls, the principles that I'm going to show you are exactly the same, but obviously the curves would be tighter because the curls would be tighter. But the basic principles that I'm going to explain in the video are exactly the same. I'm keeping it really simple. We're not going to take a long time to do it, and I'm also keeping a really limited colour palette just so that we can concentrate on the flow of the fur and getting the values and the contrast correct rather than having to think about the colours. So I'm only going to use a very limited palette in this tutorial. I'm using just Polychromos pencils. I'm just using 3 main colours. I'm using a light colour, which I'm using a warm grey 1, but you could use any light grey, that's absolutely fine. I'm using a warm grey 4 as my mid grey, but again, any mid grey that you've got. And I'm using the Polychromos black to get some of those dark areas in. The only other pencil that I'm going to use is a white pencil, and I've got 2 white pencils here. I've got a Polychromos white, which is a transparent white pencil, and I'm going to show you how that works. And I've also got an opaque pencil. This is a Pablo pencil, Pablo white pencil, and I'm just going to show you how that can be quite useful in a drawing like this as well. I'm going to use a little bit of kneadable eraser. I'm going to use my Mono Zero eraser from Tombow, and I'm going to use the slice tool. If you don't have the slice tool, don't worry about it. You can still follow the tutorial because I'll show you other ways of creating the fur if you don't have that. And again, if you don't have the Tombow Mono Zero or the kneadable eraser, just go with whatever erasers you've got and you'll still be able to benefit from the tutorial. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I've got the line drawing down. I've just got a little bit of kneadable eraser and I'm just taking these lines back just a little bit, dabbing them off so that I can still see them, but they're just not so strong. And then the colour pencil will just cover the rest of those up. So it's still there, my line drawing's there, but I've just taken it back a little bit. So because this is watercolour paper and I'm going to demonstrate a couple of ways on this fur of getting the lovely little wispy bits that you can see on the reference photograph. I'll come on to those techniques later on at the end of the tutorial, but what it means is I need to make sure that I have a good base layer of a light colour down, and I need this colour that's the base layer to be the colour that I want the highlights to be. Pretty much it needs to be a really light colour. So I'm going to go in with the warm grey 1. I'll explain it as I go through. I'll just get a little bit of paper down there actually, but I'll explain it as I go through the tutorial. So I just want to get a base layer down and I'm coming in the direction that I can see these clumps of fur coming in. So I'm just using nice even pressure. I'm not pressing on hard, making the pressure even, making the layer even, making it light in terms of pressure. But I'm just using this base layer to plot in the direction of the fur. So I can see that it comes around this way. And I'm not worried that some of the areas will be dark. I'll still put this base layer down. And I'm working fairly quickly. I just want to get this done so that you can see this quite quickly. Get this base layer down. Obviously, if we were drawing light fur, I'd make sure these pencil lines weren't here. But because I know this is going to go really dark, I'm not too worried about these pencil lines. I'm dealing with it in sections. So you can see on the reference photograph, there's a section here. So I'm just coming around this drawing in sections, making sure that I've got even pressure. That's really important, to make sure that I've got a nice even pressure. So if you're finding it a little bit difficult to get an even pressure all the way over a larger area like this, just have a practice before you actually start this little study. So if this base layer was really quite uneven, it had got hard areas, dark areas, light areas, it would actually affect, it would come through the subsequent layers, and you would see though that uneven surface showing through, and it wouldn't give us a nice even base layer to work from. And of course, if we're starting with a surface that's not that even, that's going to carry on up through the drawing. So I've just got a nice even base layer down with the warm grey 1 polychromos from Faber-Castell, and I've just done that in sections so that I can sort of see where my pencil lines are coming. The next thing I want to do now is, because we work light to dark, the next thing I want to do is to start to shape some of this first. So this is a warm grey 4. I'm not using that many pencils at all for this. This is a warm grey 4, and I'm going to start to shape this fur with this warm grey 4. So around here we've got this darker bit, just putting a bit of shape into this. I'm bringing the fur, shaping the fur around in the direction that I can see it's actually going around the coat on the reference photograph. So I can see that we've got a bit of depth here. And some of this might go quite dark, that's fine. I just want to shape this area first. Got this up here. This is going quite dark here as it sort of splits, so it's coming both ways here. And I'm only using the reference photograph as a guide. I'm not trying to exactly replicate this fur. I just want to use it as a guide so that I can see some lights and darks. See those tonal values. This is going to come around here. This is quite dark. Still keeping a nice even pressure. Bringing this around this way. I'm still very much at the plotting in stage. But bringing this fur around the coat in the direction that it is coming in the reference photograph. That's really important, that we get this fur starting already from this early stage in the right direction, because it's going to be very hard. If we get the direction wrong at this stage, it'll be very hard to try and correct that as we go up through. Not impossible, but we're just not making it easy for ourselves if we try and correct it at a later stage. It's better to just be mindful of the direction now. A little bit over here, and then we're coming around this way. And I'm working on this area all in one go, really, with the pencils, with the polychromos pencils. I do work on sort of largish areas at a time on a drawing, rather than working on a tiny little bit. It makes sense to me, especially if I'm trying to get the whole curve of this curl that we've got in the middle here. Makes sense to me to sort of work on a larger area at a time, but that's just personal preference. If you prefer to work on a smaller area and build it up that way, you know, that's absolutely fine. But for me, it just makes more sense to sort of look at it all in one go, look at that bigger picture. I've got nice sharp pencils. And this is going to come darker, so just plotting this in at this stage. Again, just starting to get the flow of this fur. I'm plotting it in with a colour like this. So this is the warm grey 4, rather than sort of going straight in with the black. Means that if I make a mistake, I can correct it much more easily. Colour pencil, you can erase it off a paper. You can't necessarily, well, it depends how hard you've pressed on. So that's another reason that I keep the pressure light as well. But if I've pressed on really hard, it's going to be harder to erase and correct if I have to. But I do keep the pressure of each layer. I work in light layers, keeping the pressure really, really light. And that way, if I need to correct something, it's easier for me to correct. So this bit around here now. And again, I'm only using that reference photograph as a guide. I just want to use it as a guide to get this lovely curl that we've got in the middle here. Comes around here. Just backwards and forwards. So you've got the darker bit in there, and then this starts to come over. I'm moving my hand around because the paper's stuck down on the board. I'm moving my hand around, but you might find it easier. In fact, if I wasn't doing the video, I would be turning my paper. It's much easier. It's much easier to do a curve that way because you're pivoting your wrist than it sort of is to come round this way because your wrist doesn't really want to go that way. Obviously, if you're left-handed, it'll be easier the other way, but for me, it's much easier to do a curve this way. Bringing this fern, just starting to get this shape in, really quite light. Starting to build this shape up so that I can see where things are going. My pencil's sharp, but it has got a nice flat bit on the end, which I call a chisel tip. It just makes sense to me to call that a chisel tip. So it's got that lovely little flat bit on the end, like sort of part of a chisel. And that gives me a nice even pressure, a nice light coverage. And I find that really useful for getting a nice even layer or even just sort of plotting things in. I don't want to plot something in like this with a really, really sharp tipped pencil. So a pencil that's been sharpened and then not being used at all. This has sort of got the used tip on the end and it just becomes a lot softer. If I use a really, really sharp pencil that's just been sharpened, just come out of the pencil sharpener and it's really super sharp, it's going to put, or has a tendency to put quite a harsh line in the paper and sort of dent the paper and you know, create too much of a pencil mark, and I don't want that. That's going to be hard to cover up later. So I'm coming around here and we've got pencil that's just sort of shaping down. We've got the bottom of this lovely curve down here. So you can see that we've already started to get some depth into there. Now that I'm happy that I've sort of started to get the shape of the curl, I've got the lovely curl coming round and the curls coming around this way. I'm going to come in with the dark pencil. I'm going to come in with the black. So what I want to do is start to bring some of this dark in. I'm using little backwards and forward strokes now. I've sort of got my area plotted in where I want to sort of create the curves. I've got that area plotted in. So I'm just going to start to shape this black. I'm not pressing on hard. I really, really don't want to press on hard. I'm sort of using this. This will become almost like a mid-tone really. That's how light I want to press on because we've got we're just using this really, really limited palette. So I want to just come in with a bit of black, really, really light. Just look for some darker bits. So where we had these darker bits, I'm going to come back over with a black, but I certainly don't want to press on hard. I'm just going to use this black to create some depth, but not taking it really dark. I'm just starting to shape this a little bit more, just going backwards and forwards. Just using these areas, these darker areas, to just start to add a little bit of depth to this paper. And turn it from a 2D piece of paper into something that's got shape and form, something that looks more 3D. This is going to come quite dark over here, but I'm not going to make it that dark yet. I'm coming in with the black, but I want to press on really lightly. Use the black a little bit more like a charcoal. And the polychromos black is really, really good for that. Because polychromos pencils are transparent, they let light through, which means they also let through other colours underneath. So the polychromos black I find really useful because it'll go over the top of other colours. Obviously we're only putting it over grey here, but in other drawings, to put it over the top of other colours, perhaps with a blue underneath or a brown underneath or a red underneath, and it just changes the shade of the black, and that's really, really useful. It's not anywhere near as opaque as some of the other blacks could be. That does mean that you have to perhaps put more layers down to make it darker and to get it nice and intense. But it does mean that you can mix it with other colours and get a really nice sort of shade of black, depending on what you want. I'm going to come around here and just start to shape this way. And this is just a rough study. It doesn't matter if you're making your fur look a bit different to how it looks on the reference photograph. The reference photograph is just here as a guide. I'm just starting to build a little bit more depth into this curl, where I can see that it's it goes slightly darker. So bring these bits over this side. Bring this around here as well. I want to leave a slightly lighter bit there because there's almost like a couple of layers of tiny little hairs. So I'm just going to make that a little bit lighter. So when it comes to looking at all the different sort of hairs and layers of hairs that are on here. So for instance, around here, you can see that there's quite a dark bit at the back. Then there are some other hairs, and then there are some other wispy bits. So I can sort of see 3 layers of hairs that need to go down there. For the minute, I'm just concentrating on what's at the back. So I'm going to work from the back out. I'm going to work from the darker bits towards the lighter bits. The lighter bits are already in here, obviously we've put the base layer down, but now I'm looking to draw in the darker bits, and that then will mean that the lighter areas will just sort of take care of themselves. They will just start to appear without us actually drawing them in. We're just drawing the darker bits in. I just want to get a little bit of colour, a bit of dark around here. Comes out this way and comes out this way, actually comes over here as well. And as it curves around there, I'll obviously go into a bit more shadow around there, and then this bit curves around as well. And again, you'd find it easier to, well, you probably find it easier to tilt your paper at this stage, turn your paper. This is a bit dark around here. Under here. And you're starting to see, I don't know if you can see on the video, but starting to see some grain showing. This is the 300 GSM paper from Fabriano Artistico. It has, to my mind, more grain, more texture than the 600 GSM, which means we have a bit more grain to sort of work through. My preference is the 600 GSM. I quite like the 600 GSM. And if I'm doing a larger drawing, or if I'm perhaps doing a commission, I would use the 600 GSM. But for a study like this, the 300 GSM is absolutely fine. And it's good paper, it's just that it has a bit more texture to it. So you have to sort of get through that texture. You can see the texture starting to come, but we'll get through that as we put the layers down. Shaping this around just a little bit. Make that a little darker in there as well, just for the minute. So we've started to get a little bit of dark in there, and you can see the curve that's coming round a little bit. I'm going to come in again, and I'm going to come in with the warm grey again. This is the warm grey 4. And I'm going to start to come over these darker bits that we've put in and start to add a little bit more pigment into these areas. Just using these backwards and forward strokes. I'm just looking to put the pigment where it's slightly darker, so I'm going to come around here with this warm grey 4. Bring the pencil strokes in the direction that the fur's coming in. Shape that a little bit. Bring this curl over this side as well. It starts to come around this side. And all the time just shaping the end of this, shaping this fur in the direction that we want it to go. Just turning my hand and just shaping this darker bit up, comes up this way. So just putting the darker bit there and coming over. And also down here. Just keeping it really simple, keeping a really, really limited colour palette. We've got a couple of layers down now, and you can see that the grain's already starting to appear. So what I want to do is I want to go back in with the lightest colour that we had again. I'm going to go back in with the warm grey 1, and I'm going to start to blend all of this together, to start to, first of all, bring it together, to start to blend it, and secondly, to fill this grain in a little bit more. So I'm coming in with sort of like oval, circle strokes, whatever you want to call them. I suppose they are a little bit more oval than circle. I'm not pressing, I'm pressing on ever so slightly harder, but I'm not pressing on really hard. And I just want to bring this area together. I'm just moving from circle strokes to directional strokes around here, because where the first sort of curves around, I don't want to diffuse that too much. I want it to sort of stay in these nice little swirls that we're creating. But I'm just coming over it, blending it. Putting more pencil down to fill this grain in a little bit, and just blending what we've got as well. Coming over this way. Coming over the darker bits as well. I'll also just help to push the pigment around and push it into that grain. Keeping a nice sharp pencil. I've got a used end on the end of my pencil, so I just want to keep turning it. I could sharpen that, and that's fine, but obviously the more you sharpen it, the more you're just using your pencils, eating your pencils up. So I just want to keep turning it, and when I turn it, I just find a sharper bit. I'm just going to neaten up this edge a little bit, just by the outline. So just blending that together in the direction that the fur's going, or using little circular strokes, depending on sort of where I am on the study, on the drawing. I'm going to come back in again, and I'm going to bring in some more of this warm grey 4 into the areas that I can see are going to go darker. I want to start to bring in a little bit more shape and a bit more texture as well. For instance, there's a clump there, but obviously that needs to be smoothed out and softened out and sort of taken up along the rest of the fur. And I'm just using these backwards and forwards directional strokes to just darken things down. I don't want to completely cover the area, because obviously we want some of this light to come through. We want some of this warm grey 1 that we've put down to show through. So I don't want to cover it completely. Just going to go around the edge around here, because I want a nice neat edge on the edge of this square. I'm just lining my pencil up on the outside, so I'm putting every pencil stroke on the outside and flicking it inside. That way I get the nice sort of flicky wispy bit on the inside, and I get a nice neat edge on the outside of the square. And I'm just coming backwards and forwards strokes, following where this needs to be darker, following it around. Again, really doesn't matter if this isn't exact. I just want to demonstrate how I would bring some fur together using these particular techniques. Let's just bring this around. So I'm not pressing on hard. If I want to add more colour and make something a bit more intense, I just go over the same space a few times. Go over the same line a few times, but I don't want to press on hard. I want this fur to be nice and soft and delicate and fluffy, and have that texture that it's, you know, soft and fluffy. So I don't want to press on hard. I want to keep the pencil strokes nice and soft. I'm going to bring tip in my hand again, and I'm going to bring this darker bit into here. Don't worry about these extra light stray hairs that you can see at the minute. We're going to add those later, and that was the reason for adding the base layer of the warm grey one, and I'll explain that as I go through when we get there. All we're doing at the minute is we're looking for the blocks of darker colour, the bits that are really sort of dark, that are quite deep into the coat. We're looking for those bits. Bring those around. So I'm using directional strokes. I'm using pencil strokes that are fairly relative to the length of the fur. Obviously this is fairly long fur here, so we are looking to make the overall fur look longer. So I'm lengthening my pencil strokes a little bit. If I've got an area that is quite sort of long, I might do little dashes but sort of stack them up on themselves, so bring them all down the length of the fur. Bring this over this way, still not pressing on any harder, but just going over that same area if I need to darken it. Just looking for these darker bits. We've just got some that comes over that way, so I'm just bringing these over this way. I'm going to come back in with the black again. Now that I've got another layer of the mid-tone down, I'm going to come back in with the black again, and I'm going to darken this down. Bringing this dark into this area again. So I'm going to look for some of the darker bits. Bringing these in. Backwards and forward strokes. And you can see that I'm just darkening it down fairly sort of slowly, fairly gently. I don't want to go straight in with a really, really dark black pencil. It's much easier to start lighter and go darker and add more dark if you need to, than it is to start really heavy and have to try and take it back out. Colour pencil will lift off paper, and it lifts off some papers better than others, particularly the watercolour paper. It lifts off some better than others, so have a bit of a practice with your, or give your paper, whatever paper you're using, just have a bit of a test, because it will lift off some papers better than it will lift off others. But it's much easier to sort of put less on and go darker than it is to go really heavy and have to try and take it off. Around here with a bit of texture. So there is a little bit of dark over here, but the real sort of dark area is over this side, isn't it? So bring a little bit of this texture around. And I'm just using these backwards and forwards strokes again to just shape some of these curls on the bottom. And then on this side, again, I'm going to use the backwards and forwards strokes to just start to add some of this texture and start to add some of this depth on this side. Bring this around. And just using backwards and forwards strokes, it means that I can keep the wispy end of the pencil stroke on both ends of the fur, and that gives me a nice sort of fairly natural fur texture. I'm holding the pencil, I mean this pencil's quite short so I can't hold it that far back, but I'm still sort of holding it halfway back. I still just want to, I find that if I hold my pencil quite far back when I'm trying to do fur like this, I find that for a start I can get less pressure because you just can't put the pressure down if you're holding your pencil back, but also it just means that my pencil strokes can be a little bit more random and I don't have to worry about, what I don't want is lots of parallel lines. So it means that I can just get a bit more of a random pencil stroke. Just going to shape this around here, make this darker. And then go back to this darker bit up here as it curves up. Still got quite a lot of grain to fill in, and different papers will have different grains, so you know you might find your paper's got more or less grain just depending on what you're using. But that is one thing that I want to work through. I want to get through this grain so that I can get something that looks a little bit more realistic and believable. Coming round this side again, and as I'm coming around this wave, this curl, I'm just using these backwards and forwards strokes to create the curves, and I'm just looking for the darker bits that are down inside the fur, and that in itself is creating the lighter bits. The lighter bits will just form by me adding the darker bits in. I want to make this quite dark in here, which might look a little bit strange initially, but I'll explain why I've done it like this as I go through. It's making this darker than it actually is. And then we've got this bit that comes off this way, haven't we? So it comes around here. It's a lovely bit that curves from the top. this over. And again, just at this minute, I'm making it quite dark, rather than worrying about all these little bits of fur that are coming this direction. We'll look at those afterwards. It's quite dark in the middle. And I don't want to press on hard because I don't want to flatten the tooth of the paper, because once I flatten the tooth of the paper, it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to add more layers. So I want to keep this pencil pressure light. And I can just build up the layers slowly, and I won't have to worry about damaging the tooth of the paper. In the middle here, I'm just going to switch to circular strokes. Circles or ovals, whatever's more comfortable. And I do switch between the two. And then this bit over here, let's make this nice and dark, because this is quite dark over here. So let's come in with this dark pencil on this side. I'm just going to go down. I just want to keep a nice neat line down there. And I'm just coming round in the direction that this fur's coming around, and it's just curving around a little bit, isn't it? Bringing that round. So I'm going to start to blend this darker colour out again, coming back in with the warm grey. Keeping the pencil nice and sharp, because we've got to sort of get into this grain on this little study. Just bringing that pencil towards the edge again. I'm just sort of letting it come to the edge, just to keep it nice and neat. It's not really part of the study, the edge, but it's just keeping it nice and neat. And then I'm just going to come around and just blend out these darker bits again. Let them come over and into the light. I don't want to completely fill the area in. I still want to let some of the light coming through. I still want to let some of the light come through, but I do just want to blend these darker areas. And every layer that we put on fills in the grain, gets rid of that grain, and just starts to smooth out the surface a little bit more. Starts to smooth out the surface of this paper. So the pencils just start to go down like butter. Start to blend this darker area into a slightly lighter area over here. So I'm going to bring this warm grey around. And it's just bringing the colours, it's just bringing these areas together a little bit. Let's just go to a circular motion down here. There's still quite a bit of grain here to blend through. And so I'm coming back again with the black, sorry. Still got to get through some of this grain. Make this darker in areas where it needs to go darker. I'm coming in with these backwards and forward strokes again. Obviously we don't need to make every area as dark. So just because I'm coming in with the black, not all of the areas need to be as dark, but some of them do need to go quite dark. It still needs to go quite dark in here. And I know this looks a little bit strange in here because it looks like a big sort of block of colour. I'll explain that in a second now. Let's come around this side and just shape a little bit more depth into this. And every time you put the pencil down, I know that it might seem like we're just going over and over, but that's how we build up the colour pencil. Every time we put a layer, another layer down, it adds more to the drawing. Every time we put a layer down, it's smoothing out this surface, it's getting rid of the grain on the paper, it's getting rid of that tooth of the paper. I don't just want to come straight in really heavy-handed with the dark pencil and try and make this go dark as quickly as possible, because all I'll do is crush down the tooth of that paper. And once I've crushed the tooth of that paper down, there's not really much I'm going to be able to do. It'll take very few layers, depending on how hard I've pressed and how heavy-handed I was. will sort of dictate how many more layers it can take. But the whole point of when you come in really quite heavy-handed, you're just crushing down that tooth of that paper, and that's going to stop us putting as many layers on. Tipping my hand again, but you'd find it probably easier to tip this paper. And I'm just coming in with the darker bit around here. Keep turning my pencil as well so that I can keep a nice sharpish part of the pencil. And having a sharper pencil will certainly help you get through the grain faster. I don't necessarily always want a really sharp pencil, especially if I'm trying to blend a colour on the paper. I may not want that pencil that sharp. I may want more of that chisel tip that I mentioned earlier, because it allows for really nice even light pressure. Sometimes I might want a nice even light layer if I'm sort of trying to blend a colour, or you know, just building things up slowly. So it can be really useful. Bringing some of this curl around here. I want to come back on this side as well, and shape this lovely sort of twist in the fur here. We've got some that goes this way, and then we've got some that comes off this way. Lovely little twist. And the nice thing about doing a coat like this is, of course, we don't have to try and follow this photograph too much. We don't have to worry if we've not got all the little bits of hair in place, because as long as we've got sort of like a wave, and as long as we're following it around with the lights and the shadows, we're going to get something that actually looks like a curl on a coat. Because, you know, I mean, this curl could be any sort of shape really, and it'll still look good. That's the nice thing about these little studies, that the curve of the coat the curl can be any sort of shape, as long as it's more about us getting the values in there to make that curl look realistic and 3D, make the coat look 3D, not really about the shape of the curl. That's not what this is about. So we can sort of practice getting the lights and darks and getting these tonal values in to make this look real, and we don't have to really worry too much about the actual shape of things. Just bringing this off and shaping this down here, shaping this around here. And then again, I'm just going to make this darker in here. Going to bring this into this side as well. The one thing with the polychromos is that it's a lovely pencil. It's a lovely transparent black pencil. Works really sort of well to mix with other colours. Now, if this was actually on a portrait, I would probably be mixing this with another colour to sort of intensify the black a little bit. Maybe a bit of the dark indigo, maybe the Caput Mortuum violet, maybe the Delft blue, maybe the dark sepia. Something to intensify it, a nice sort of colour in there to make it pop. But as we're keeping this to a simple palette, I'm just keeping this to the polychromos black. And on this dark bit on this side, I'm just going to come to little circular strokes and just darken that down. But then I'm just going to feather it out this way on the edge afterwards, on the top layer, and feather it out on the edge as we get to the end over here. And just feather that in a little bit, some of that sort of feathers in. I'm going to come back in with the warm grey one now and just start to have a look at these lighter areas that we put in. So where these lighter areas are, I'm going to come back with this warm grey one and I'm just going to blend these out. I'm going to come around in the direction that the fur's coming in. And just use this warm grey one to blend out some of the darker areas into the lighter areas as well. Just keeping those pencil strokes coming in the direction that the fur's coming in. Where I can see these lighter bits, I'm just going over these lighter bits, just following them round and letting them blend themselves. So the warm grey pencil, I'm going over the lighter bits, letting it go into the darker bits as well, and letting those areas just blend together a little bit, make it look a little bit more natural, like a shiny coat. I'm going to bring it around down here as well. Just looking to pick out those lighter bits. I'll just keep this nice and neat on the end again. I'm pressing on ever so slightly harder. I'm not pressing on really hard, but I'm pressing on ever so slightly harder. And that's just pushing the pigment around that's underneath, blending it together. Just giving me a nice blend between these lighter bits and these darker bits. This bit around here, I want to make this darker under here because there's quite a bit of sort of shadow under here where we come into this curve. So I just want to make this middle bit around here just a little bit darker. So back in with that warm grey. Darken that down just a little bit under there. So we've worked on that base layer, we've worked on that sort of back layer of fur, and now what I want to do is I want to start to bring a bit more depth. It looks a little bit flat at the minute. What I want to do is to bring a little bit of depth into this fur. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Mono Zero eraser from Tombow and I'm going to use it to start to draw in some of this fur that's sort of sitting up. So sort of like looking at the next layer of fur, the layer that's going to be on top of this. So what I want to do is I want to effectively just draw with this eraser. I'm going to come into the area and I'm just going to start to use backwards and forwards strokes, drawing with this, just like a pen. The only thing to remember is that this will get dirty quite quickly. Obviously it's picking up quite a bit of pigment from the paper. It'll get dirty quite quickly. As it gets dirty, it just stops working. It either stops working or it just starts to drag the pigment around. And when it gets like that, you just need to clean it. So I just clean it off either on a piece of paper or on, I've got a wooden drawing board and I just clean it off on the drawing board. But you want it to be nice and clean, and once it's nice and clean, it will start working for you again. I'm going to come around and create some extra bits of fur that are going over the top of these darker bits that we've put in. I can bring them around this way as well. The nice thing about the Mono Zero is that it gives you quite a soft sort of fur texture. So it's going to give me a nice soft fur texture to build in some soft highlights. This is why I wanted to make this quite dark in here, for this reason. What I want to do now is to bring in a little bit of fur going in different directions, but with this mono eraser. So I'm going to have some bits going over here. And again, once it gets dirty, I'll keep twisting it. You can twist it so much and then you'll have to clean it. It'll just pick up too much pigment and it just stops working. So I don't want to go mad with this. I don't want to sort of take everything back out. But what I want to do is to bring in some texture, some bits that are just coming in different directions to represent hairs that are coming over the top of what we've already put down. So this bit around here. And like I said, it gives you nice and soft clumps of fur. Let's come over this way. I'm just putting a couple of little bits in that just go in different directions. I'm going to go over these bits that we've just put in with this warm grey one and just blend them a little bit. Just make them so that they don't look like lines that we've just erased out and that they do actually look like they're part of the drawing. So I'm just going to come in with those first of all. Bring this over where these extra little lines were. The other thing I'm going to do is to perhaps just tint some of them, break some of them up. They don't all need to be bright white, or they're not bright white because obviously they're warm grey one, but they don't all need to be really bright. So I'm just going to break up, add a little bit of shadow to some of them, or just tint some of them, make them just look a little bit more realistic again, like they're actually part of the drawing and not just an erased line that's sat on the surface. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and around some of them and pick some of them up with this black. And I'm using black because this is my darkest colour in this particular drawing. So I'm just looking to add a little bit of shadow in and around some of them. And that'll just emphasise just some of them a little bit. Looking to pick up some of the darker bits. So I want to bring a little bit more texture into here as well. Now we've put a little bit of this eraser texture into here. I want to just bring this black through my darkest colour, my darkest value, and just put some extra little bits to just add a bit more texture into this area. I'm just going to break up some of these as well. These were the eraser lines that we've put in here, and again I'm just going to break them up. I'm just using this black. It's got a nice sharp point on it because I want to get into sort of the small areas now. I want to get into those little in-between bits that are sort of in between the lighter hairs that we've put in. And I'm just looking to darken this down, break up some of this texture that we've put in with this black. I don't want to put the black everywhere. Now that we're getting sort of up through the layers, I want to put the black into sort of smaller places and less surface area on the drawing. So I'm just bringing this black through. You can see that it's just starting to add an extra layer of fur that we didn't have from just the pencil alone. Pulling out some of the darker bits around here as well. So I'm just going in and around those lighter bits that we've just put in with the eraser. I'll make this quite dark down here. And all the other layers that we've put on now, that all adds to the texture, it adds to the depth. And as you start to build up through the layers as well, by now we've sort of got the paper to a state where it's more like an ice ring. It's a nice smooth surface. And that means that the colours just go down on it. The pencils go down on it better. The colours are a bit more intense. That you can get detail in there that you couldn't necessarily get in from the outset on the paper when it had all the grain in it. It does mean sometimes you have to be careful because your pencils can make a stronger mark than you think, and you may not always want that. So that is something that you do sort of, have to think about. But as you go up through the layers, you can get more detail and more intensity with those layers. I'm just darkening this down. I want this to be quite dark under here. I'm just trying to keep those pencil strokes quite random as well. The last thing I want is for it to turn into lots of parallel lines. That's not going to look so realistic if it's all parallel lines. So we've got some darker, more intense areas in there. And you can see that there is a nice sort of curl shaping in there. If you didn't have the Tombow eraser, the other way that you can make highlights, I'll just show you. This is the kneadable eraser, and this is also really useful for making highlights. So I've just broken a bit off. It comes in a much bigger, and there's a couple, I've got different colour ones in there, sort of squished in together there. But you take a little bit, or I take a little bit, and I shape it into either a pencil. You can either shape it into a pencil, and you can just sort of drag bits out. So you can see here I'm just dragging areas out. You can see there that that's actually sort of dragging out that highlight. So you can use it to sort of drag like a paintbrush, or like you'd use a pencil. The other way is to, or the other way that works for me for fur is to shape it into quite a long, almost like, well, I suppose it's almost like a blade of a knife. It's that sort of thin. And then you can curve it into the shape that you want. So you can actually sort of knead it, and then you can dab it on. And it will give you a highlight, or it'll give you, it'll pull off the pigment, but in the curve that you want it, sort of pulled off at. So you can either dab it, or you can brush it on like a paintbrush. So it really depends on your paper. It depends on how sort of heavy you've put your pigment down. It depends also how old perhaps your eraser is. This eraser is quite old now. I think it's probably about time for me to change it. So it depends how tacky your eraser is, but I'm just dragging it through just to create a few extra highlights in this area. And that can also give you really nice, soft, diffused highlights. I'm just sort of dragging it over, and it's picking up what it wants to pick up, and then, you know, leaving what it wants to leave. And that in itself can create some nice natural highlights. So you don't necessarily have to use this way, you don't necessarily have to use the Tombow way, but I just wanted to demonstrate a couple of ways that will give you some nice highlights with the eraser, and it can really give you some nice soft sort of definition and some nice soft texture. I'm just going to come around here with it as well, actually, and just pull out a few highlights, just pull out a little bit here. And I'm just going to come around here with it. Like I say, depending on how new your eraser is, it'll obviously be more tacky, but also it'll depend on your paper as well as to what sort of lifting qualities you've got on that paper. Have a bit of a test, have a bit of a play with it. Okay, but you can see that we've brought in a couple of extra highlights there with the kneadable eraser. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in with a white now, and where we've just brought those highlights through, I'm going to come over just like I did before with the warm grey one, but this time I'm just going to make them a little bit brighter. I'm still keeping a really simple small sort of colour palette, so I'm just going to come over with the white and just add a little bit of brightness to these highlights that we've just put through. I'm using the Polychromos white for this. So the other thing that I can do, because we're using a limited palette, I can also take this Polychromos white over the warm grey 4 and even over some of the black in areas, and that's going to give me even more tones of the grey and the black. I don't just have to take it over the light areas. It's just, we've created quite a few different sort of shades and tones here by sort of mixing these colours. So to use the Polychromos white, that will give us even more colours, or give us even more tones by going over the warm grey 5 and the black as well. The warm grey 4 and the black, sorry. I'm just going to come in with this darker bit again and just darken down bits that are really sort of deep down. I don't necessarily need to darken everywhere, but there are bits on here that are really quite dark. For instance, we've got quite a dark bit over here. I want to really get that contrast. It's going to be this contrast that is going to really sort of show the viewer that there is a lot of depth in this coat, that it's a thick coat with a lot of lovely depth to it. So there are areas that I want to get quite sort of dark, not everywhere, but I do want to build up contrast in areas. And the other thing about blending, we've blended with the warm grey 1, we've even blended with we've blended the darker areas with the warm grey 4, and now we've just blended with the white. That then again we're making that surface more like an ice rink. We're filling that grain in, and this black pencil is going to go down even more intense because we've built up that lovely shiny surface that's almost like an ice rink. And that helps to keep these dark colours intense, and it just means that we can also get a much sort of finer line, so I can get more detail as the paper gets, as the surface of the paper gets smoother. The ability to sort of add these finer lines gets better. It gets easier to add these finer lines. I'm just going to darken this bit down over here, just a little bit light. So I'm just going back in with the warm grey 4 over this side, just to darken that down just a little bit. And then I'm going to come under, just looking for areas that are just slightly darker. I don't need to put this everywhere. I just want to, so sort of like right up in the little V's where clumps of fur come together and it creates that little V. That's where it's obviously going to be darkest. That's where there's going to be the least amount of light sort of coming through, and that's where we're going to have the darker bits of the pencil need to go into there. Again, just where these bits are, these little V's, that's where it's going to be darker. This is quite dark around here, isn't it? So let's just make this a little bit darker in here. And I'm just picking out underneath little bits to darken down underneath them, and then that's going to make them pop forward and make it look like they're standing up. So for instance, I've just gone around this little bit here, and I mean, I'm sort of using the reference photograph as a guide, but obviously we've made some of this up as well. So I just want to go underneath areas and make it darker. Bring the warm grey 4 around here. This should just be a little bit darker around there as that curl starts to curve around. Okay, so we've started to get some of the depth in. We've started to put some highlights put some softer highlights with the kneadable eraser. I'm just using the warm grey to just add a little bit of depth over this side as well, actually. So yeah, so we've got the wave going through the middle, and we've started to put a little bit of depth in. And we've put some softer highlights in with the erasers. So what I want to do now is I just want to demonstrate how we can put some of the finer hairs in. We've got some finer hairs towards the middle. We've got some other hairs that are sort of coming over in different directions. And it just adds another layer to the fur. And it just gives it a little bit more depth again. And there's a couple of ways that we can do this. I may do both in a drawing, I may not, and I may just use one or the other, but I'm going to demonstrate both to you on this particular study, and then at least you'll know how I would put these extra sort of stray hairs in. The first way that I would put the extra stray hairs in is using either a slice tool or a craft knife if you don't have the slice tool. I've got the manual pen cutter from the slice tool range, and I use this quite a lot, actually. I really like this. I find, personally for me, because it's got a rounded edge on it, and it doesn't cut skin either, but it's got a rounded edge on it, that it's not quite so harsh on the paper as something like a craft knife would be. Now obviously different craft knives have different sort of shaped blades. Some are more sort of severe, sharper, some are not so sharp and pointy. My particular craft knife is quite sharp and pointy, so it does sort of catch my paper a little bit every now and again. So I'm going to use a slice tool. Now this is the reason that we had to put the base layer down. I've got other tutorials where I go through why it's important to put base layers down with the slice tool, so I'm not going to go through that here. That's not the purpose of this tutorial. But the slice tool, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over the top of this area now with the slice tool. I don't need to press on hard, I just need to bring the slice tool around in sort of the directions of these hairs, and I'm just adding an extra few stray hairs here and there. Bring it down here. Because I've got this base layer down, it'll come off quite nicely, particularly on the Fabriano. One thing I should have said actually is the slice tool won't work on all sorts of paper, so it really depends what paper you've got as to whether the slice tool will work. I have had people say to me that they can't get on with the slice tool, they just can't use the slice tool, it doesn't work for them, it just sort of cuts into their paper and it makes a mess. And it could be, especially if you've got your base layer down and you've got a nice coverage of base layer and pigment and it's still not working, it could be that it is your paper. So have a test on your paper. I mean, obviously there are other ways. This is why I'm going to show you another way in a minute of putting these stray hairs in. So if the slice tool doesn't work on your particular paper, that's okay, because we've got other ways that we can put this in. So the slice tool will only go back to your first layer of pencil that you've got on the paper, which is why we had to put a light base layer down as the first layer, because the slice tool is just going back to that first warm grey one base layer we put down. But like I say, I'm not going to go into it too much because I've got other tutorials that talk about base layers and why they're important. So just like before, I'm going to go over this now with a white pencil and just sort of make these little slice tool marks so that they sort of fit in, so that they don't just like little bits of pigment that we've just scratched out, that they actually do look like little hairs sitting on the surface. I could go over these now with the polychromos white if that's the only one that I had. I'm going to use the Pablo though. I'm going to come in with the Pablo, and the reason I'm going to come in with the Pablo is because and it's a nice sharp Pablo, obviously, because we've just put some nice sharp little marks in there, some nice thin little marks. The reason I'm going to come over with the Pablo is because not only am I going to show you how I just tint these slice tool marks that I've just put in. Let me just add a little bit into here to just define some of those slice tool marks. The Pablo pencil is a nice opaque pencil, so it's going to go over those slice tool marks quite nicely. It's a much more opaque pencil than the polychromos, although the polychromos would have just tinted these nicely. But what I wanted to go on to show you, what the Pablo will do is the Pablo will also make its own little marks over the surface of the paper. So if you didn't have the slice tool, or you didn't want to use the slice tool, you can just, let me just sort of do one around here so you can see, you could just come over with a nice opaque white pencil like the Pablo pencil, and that in itself will create some of these little stray hairs for you. So I've just put a couple in. Let's put a couple in there. It's not quite as intense as the slice tool, obviously, because we're putting the white pencil over the top of the black or the grey or something. So it will always be more intense using the slice tool first. But you might want a really delicate little sort of muted bit of hair that's coming over, or you might just want to have something that isn't quite as harsh as the slice tool, and that will, a nice opaque white like the Pablo will work for you. I'm just sort of using it to highlight some of these other bits as well whilst I'm here. So here's another example of where I can sort of demonstrate it's coming over. And just creating some extra little highlight bits. Where I want it to be a little bit more white than that polychromos was. Extra little bits here and there. So using the pencil like this without the slice tool underneath it, this Pablo pencil, it's only really going to work for really sort of thin, muted little pencil strokes. If you want them really bright, then the slice tool or the kneadable eraser or something is going to work, or the Tombow will work a lot better to actually remove the pigment. But if you want something that's quite sort of subtle, just using a pencil, a nice opaque pencil, can work quite nicely. So I just wanted to show you both ways, sort of two ways really, the slice tool or the white opaque pencil, to create those little stray hairs. And then what I'm going to do again, just before I finish, nearly there now, but I'm going to just use this black to just come around in between some of these other bits of lighter pencil strokes. So I'm going to come around with the dark bit where I need it to go really quite dark. It's coming in and around these little bits that we've just put in with either the slice tool or with the white opaque pencil, with the Pablo pencil. It's coming around here, just darkening some of them down. Don't want to go everywhere with this black pencil now. And the reason that we had to sort of put all the dark in before is because as we look through, so for instance, these little bits here, these little bits now look quite realistic because they're going in one direction, but all the fur underneath is going in another direction. And that's just sort of made them look a little bit, look more realistic than if we were trying to now sort of get the pencil to go, you know, this way in and around. It just wouldn't work. We just have to put the darker pencil in beforehand. And I'm just going to come in and around just with this black pencil, just once more to just darken down areas that I just think can just go a little bit darker and just emphasize the depth that is in this fur coat. I'm not pressing on any harder, but by this time now, the pigment, the dark pigment, is actually going down quite nicely and quite intensely because we've built up that lovely sort of ice rink surface on the watercolour paper. And this is hot press watercolour paper, which is different to the cold press watercolour paper, which we would tend to use for painting, the cold press. Hot press, you can obviously paint on the hot press, but it just has less texture on the surface, less grain, less tooth, and that is quite a nice surface. I quite like, I mean, obviously not everybody likes drawing on the hot press paper. I quite like drawing on hot press paper. Just has enough texture to, and all sort of hot press papers are different. You just have to sort of experiment with the brand to get something that you like that's going to work for you. But I find it has just enough texture to hold on to all the layers that I want to put down. But still allows me to get a nice amount of detail in. Just going to bring that around there. I'm just bringing these last few darks in and around to just really emphasize areas and bring in this contrast. Following these curves around. Like I say, I've used the reference photograph as a guide, but I haven't sort of stuck to it absolutely. I've just sort of done my own thing a little bit, but hopefully you get an idea as to how I would build more of a wavy, whether it's waves or curves. Obviously this is quite a wavy coat. If it was a curly coat, well, obviously the waves would just be tighter, that's all. So whether it's wavy or curly, you know, the principle's pretty much the same for me on watercolour paper. So slightly different way of building it up than we would on the drafting film or the pastel mat, but for watercolour paper this is pretty much how I would build up you know, wavy or curly fur. Wouldn't necessarily use all of the techniques that I've put in here. So for instance, I wouldn't necessarily use all of the slice tool or the opaque pencil. I probably would, but you know, if you see a tutorial and I haven't, don't say to me, oh, you use that in the in the first study, because I just wanted to demonstrate all of the techniques that I would probably use to. The other way is to, you've probably seen people sort of indent the texture in, the highlights in. I'm not a great fan of that, so I wouldn't really use the indenting method to put texture into fur like this. I tend to use the indenting method for whiskers, that sort of thing, really. I'd probably, well, there's no probably about it, I am more likely to use the erasers, and I do use the Tombow, I do use the kneadable eraser, I do use the slice tool, and I do use like that pencil, just a nice opaque pencil to come over the top. Okay, so this is what the little first study looks like after about an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4 of working on it. And this is what it looks like after I worked on it for about another 1/4 of an hour. I just went around the darker areas with the black pencil to darken those down a little bit. Just added a little bit more white onto the highlighted areas. And I just added a couple of extra little tiny stray hairs with the slice tool. So that was about an extra 1/4 of an hour of working on it, just darkening it down and blending it out, but not using any different techniques, just literally going over all the techniques that we've used, all the products that we've used, and just literally working on it for another sort of 10 minutes, 1/4 of an hour or so. So I think that's about it. I will leave that there now. It's just a little bit deeper, and I'm quite happy with that. Nice little first study. So I hope you enjoy taking part in the little first study with me, and I'll see you next time.